Okay, good evening. Welcome to our special meeting for the beginning of our budget for 2025. Just for public information, this is the first of many meetings we have scheduled over the next couple of weeks. The first being tonight, tomorrow night, Saturday morning from 9 until noon, and then again next Monday. And at that point, we'll determine whether we need more time and schedule additional meetings if required. To open the meeting this evening, I'll take any declarations of pecuniary interest. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you. Through you. On the fire emergency service portion of the budget.
Okay, and you have filed the paperwork with our clerk. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll move to the adoption of the agenda.
It is moved by Councillor Restoule and seconded by Councillor Larrabee. Be it resolved that the agenda of the council budget meeting held on November the 25th, 2024 be adopted as presented.
Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Okay, with that, we will move to item number 3, our budget presentation. And for that, I will pass it to our CAO, Mr. Barbeau.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Here we are presenting our 2025 budget proposals or information for council to consider. Just looking across at you and thinking, well, this is my 25th or 27 budgets that the municipality has existed, and I'm just looking at this here. When I started, and I'm still using this is the technology I use, and it's more trustworthy because it never breaks down. It's solar powered. So you have before you your 2025 budget workbook. In it, you'll find regular stuff. You'll find the budget summary. Find key changes or the material changes that are proposed for next year. You'll find the operating budget by department. You'll find the reserve position, the debt position, and all the stuff you need to consider in order to properly deliver. I want to start off also by saying, firstly, some of the, we would have liked to start a little bit early, not a ton earlier though, because of the amount of work. There are a lot of other projects that we've had this year. This is the second year that we start in the fall or pre-Christmas. And last year worked very well. We could have closed it hopefully a little bit sooner so that we can actually get to the capital tendering a little bit sooner, but even with that, we did very well last year in terms of what we normally do in terms of when we get our tender documents out. So that was very good. Some of the changes that you'll see, and probably a little bit for some of the delay, it looks all very good with you, you know, and very well presented. But there was a lot of work in the background done by Elisa and or Miss Craddock. Are we going to get less formal the more we get in here? And Cass to develop that. So you'll see the 4 or 5 year comparables. That should help you this year. That was requested last year. So pulling that up was and ensuring that we were comparing apples to apples was important as well. What you have again. So as with every year, we start at a starting point. And this year, the starting point is we have a shortfall between revenues and expenditures of $1,377,484. And that represents a 6.52% increase. This is an important number to know, that 1%, because I know councillors like to speak in percentage of tax increases. 1% represents 211,395. So those are the key numbers. I'll let Elisa kick in and talk some of the key changes and go over some of the uncontrollable expenses. Normally, we get hit a little bit harder on uncontrollable expenses, and those are expenses that council has no say, they must accept, pretty much. And those are boards such as the police board, DSAP, OSHATO, and the like. Also, some things that are uncontrollable are on the revenue side. We don't have complete or control over what the province of Ontario gives us. And so historically, we have been facing declining revenues through our government grants. And first, in our first iteration of the budget, we were looking at assuming the same thing, and lo and behold, our friends in Toronto came with a gift, and it turns out that it's a $650,000 increase. So that's very helpful. The other assumption that is in your budget that brings it down to 6.5% is that we have taken the liberty of actually filling in a number for use of reserve. Last year, I think we kept it blank, and it was like a 1,000,000% increase. This year, we're going with the assumption, and it could change obviously, but the assumption that we're putting down, we were dropping it from 1.5 to 1.2 last year. So Ms. Craddock put in the $900,000 assumption. And so that lowers it to 6.52. Reserve position, we have a surplus of approximately, what is it, 1.2? Something like that? I don't have it in my notes here.
Just over $1 million.
Just over $1 million, sorry. So we have a surplus of just over $1 million, which represents about a 2.5 or slightly over 2.5% margin on the total expenditure. So it looks like it's a large number. So is our budget, and so those gaps in our comfort level, we have just a few things go south on us, and what we don't want to do ever, even though we don't budget for surpluses, but we control our expenditures for surpluses. We don't really want to face deficits. And I haven't faced one since other than the first year I was here, I faced a doozy, but since then we haven't faced a deficit. So that makes your job a little easier. I'll let Elisa now. So part of the structure, so Elisa is going to obviously be the chief numbers person. And so she will be taking a good part of the presentation and dealing with the budget itself. The directors are here to basically answer any operational questions. And it's our hope to get through the budget workbook as a presentation tonight. And then I understand, speaking with Elisa meeting her chair, was the mayor, that as soon as we can get to capital and choices for capital, the better we'll all be, and that way we can get to tendering. So I just want to remind you, though, that you can't really do that in a vacuum unless you're ready to discuss acceptable budget increases. You can make an assumption that your capital could remain status quo on the level of expenditure, but perhaps it doesn't if council doesn't feel that the tax increase is acceptable. I would point out, though, the tax increase is a starting point. I wouldn't, and I have to say this now again 25 times, and everybody panics, but it's the start of a workbook. It's a council budget, and so council deliberates and gets it to an acceptable level after that. So Elisa will go through the presentation. If you can keep your questions and just write them down after, I think it'll probably be a little bit more, it'll be a little quicker and stay on point. The second thing I would say too is that sometime there are going to be there's really going to be a need to go into closed session, and we're probably contemplating that tomorrow to talk about a few issues that are subject to closed session under the Municipal Act. So I don't know if I missed anything. All right. It's all yours. Good night. I have to go shovel my driveway.
Here, I just introduced something before we pass to Ms. Craddock. I would just like to thank staff additionally for the handbook that was provided. Because I think that the information that was provided there, which we haven't seen in previous budgets, I know was really useful for me as a refresher to get our mind into that budget process and understand some of the different terminology and phrases. But I think it's a really great tool for the public. To help the public understand the municipal budgeting process. And I would just like to acknowledge the work that was put into that. And that I appreciate staff taking the initiative to provide that because I found it very useful.
I really appreciate that because I forgot. Can I nail the staff down? As I'm sitting in a budget planning and all of a sudden it was like a Christmas gift. Our communications person, Cass Jolin, and I'll single her out, puts this document before us. She wasn't asked. She just did it. It was like, what? This is the perfect document. And it just goes to show what they do there. So I really thank you for pointing that out. I'm really appreciative of it. And I can't take the credit. Cass has been subtly asking Elisa questions and Elisa's been subtly answering them. And then all of a sudden, poof, presto, we have this book. So kudos to the communications team.
Yeah, I was so impressed with it. In fact, that in speaking with a colleague from another municipality today who starts their budget a little later than ours, I actually recommended they go and look at our website and look at this document because it is just, it's so useful from a layperson's term, from council perspective, from a resident's perspective in understanding the different pieces that go into a municipal budget. So I just wanted to thank you and the staff team very much for putting that together. And with that, please, Ms. Craddock, you may continue.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through the first part of things fairly quickly because we're going to deal with it kind of at the department level. So if you're looking at page 5, your highlights from 2024, this is going to look pretty familiar because it's going to be very similar to the Q3 update you got as far as what the summary looks like it's going to be, what the challenges have been in 2024. I will take a moment just to talk about the projections for 2024 because this is the first time where we've given detailed projections like that about an ending point. And just so you can kind of, gauge how to receive that, I will tell you that I'm conservative, right? So when I'm looking at, what revenues might be at the end of the year, I'm taking where we are right now and kind of a conservative view of what typically happens at the end of the year. Building and planning might continue full steam ahead to the end of the year and come up with better revenues than we thought. So I've been conservative on the revenues. On the expense side, I tend to kind of err the other way. We certainly have had I shouldn't even say it because I understand it's snowing outside. We've had sort of a slow start to our winter season and we had an early finish to our winter season last year. And so some of the things like, materials and HR is sort of connected to the fact that here we are at the end of November. But if we have snow every day between now and the end of the year, things do change. But I've done projections sort of based on historical and where we are now, but also with giving you kind of a conservative spot. I didn't want to come in saying, hey, look, you've got a potential surplus of 1.6 million, and then come back and say, it was only 800,000, So I've tried to be conservative so that you're not banking on more than what's there with things. So if we move ahead again from the to key budget changes that start at page 10. Again, we'll go through these bits as we go through the individual departments. So I'm not going to go through them all, but as we hit the departments, I will highlight these things that are in here. You can see some of them are labeled sort of as a strategic decision and what part of your term plan they kind of relate to. And some of them are things that are more those uncontrollables. There is a separate table of uncontrollables, but some of that here is things that is just significant change, but not necessarily things that the council can actually adjust on. I will take you to the end of that section though, and we're going to look at page 16 and just give you that highlight of things that impact all the budgets and the assumptions that we've used going forward. Now, when we're talking this time, we are talking about sort of levels of expenditure, and all your budgets are kind of, estimates of things. So I've used a 7% estimate on insurance over 2024 actuals. We've seen some really hard increases in insurance the last 3 years. 2024 was a little bit better than the 2 years before that. Our our broker is she's not ready to call it a softening market yet, but says that we should be able to come in with a smaller increase than we did last year. And it is just a function of the market. Our claims history is reasonable. Our risk mitigation is reasonable. We are facing some challenges this year in that they are with the replacement cost of facilities means that all of our facilities for insurance purposes, their values have increased, which then increases premiums on insurance. So we've done a lot of work with our broker to try to get as reasonable numbers as we can on replacements so that it's actually sort of based on square footage, based on assessments, based on information we have from third parties, so we can do sort of as best as we can with insurance costs. But we are anticipating an increasing market there. The other one that's increasing and hitting all departments is utility costs. Kind of over the last few years, we've actually pulled back on our budgeted utility costs because we have managed to recognize some savings from LEDs and putting timing on lights and various things that have given us some savings. We've now sort of caught up. And so this is just sort of a year-over-year increase on our utility costs. So those are going to kind of impact all of the budgets. Obviously, community services has got all the facilities in them. They've got a much more significant portion of it, but fire and public works have their own facilities. Public works has all the street lights which tie into it and things like that. So it does impact all of the budgets. Now I'm going to get through budget really fast because I'm going to actually skip all the summary pages right now because we're going to go through the departments. So I'm going to start on page 25 and we're going to look at mayor and council. I'm mostly going to focus on what the budget is. I will sort of tie back to when there's odd things in the history or things that might look odd in the history. I will kind of highlight those for you as we roll through. Salaries and wages, we have an estimated increase for council. Also an estimated increase in education. So if you take a look back over the education costs, part of the when you're looking at the 5-year here has to do with the fact that we were in COVID. And so there wasn't training being offered, there wasn't travel happening, and then we came out of COVID and also had a new council, and so we've sort of got back into that role of attending there. You'll see we're going to be just a little bit over the 30, so I have sort of increased for the potential of just making sure we've got your education portion covered. Additionally, with all of the education, our travel policy has the mileage part is tied to the CRA mileage rate, which does increase every year. So we always will have a little bit of increase just mileage on that. Community projects labeled at 20,000 for 2025. Community projects is just the senior supper. So we transferred some to reserves in a couple of years. The 2024 number is the net amount after we took stuff from reserve back in. So we reduced it because we had the amounts in reserve. There is still a little bit in reserve sort of for 2024, and sorry, that was 2023 we did that. So there is still a little bit in reserve to cover 2024. But after that, looking at the cost we now had from Mr. Poulin earlier this year, we're going to continue the senior supper in the format that we've been running it the last 2 years. There will be a need for an increase into that budget line. The line, the 10,000 that hasn't changed, is labeled CSWB, is Community Safety and Wellbeing. And so a couple of years ago, I think it was 2023, we put this line in for council. So you had just a bit of discretion in funds to use for special projects. We did transfer it all to reserve in 2023. I'll have to go back. We did transfer the amount to reserve 1 year, and so then things like the Planet used the $5,000 investment has come out of that line. We have some stuff in reserve. I am going to bring back to council next meeting some requests to transfer some amounts into reserve that for projects that weren't used this year, and this is one of them as well that I would ask. That we're probably going to just sort of encapsulate that 10,000. That the amount that didn't get used into reserve, so you've got it for future. But that's what the CSWB is, Community Safety and Wellbeing. Discretionary grants, that increase of 70,000 looks like a lot, but it's actually not new money. And so this is on your, when you talk about our highlights, this is actually funds that were sitting in general government and we're sitting in community services. We pulled it out of those two budgets and put it into your budget to sort of follow how we're now handling those discretionary grants. And that's those fee waiver requests, the food bank amounts where they come looking for actual cash donations and things like that. So I've just taken sort of what was there for the last 2 years and put it over into your, to sort of represent that it's under your control. We don't have it in multiple budgets and things like that. So that's not new money. That's just a transfer from other departments to the mayor and council budget. And you don't have anything going on with your capital or things like that. So that's what we've bought for mayor and council.
Can we stop in between to, do you want questions tonight or are we going to come back through the entire document with questions?
If it's okay with council, if you've got questions on what's presented, I don't mind the questions at the end of the budget. If you want to actually sort of be doing the debate on the level of budget, I prefer that come later, yeah.
Okay, no, I have a question that's just an explanation. Non-TCA expenses, obviously you don't have anything budgeted, but there was 12,000. Just what is that?
Oh, so it stands for non-taxable capital assets. So it's when we're
You asked.
I asked.
it's when the department is buying little things that aren't capital, that aren't going to go on balance sheet, but are kind of small equipment and materials
Like a
purchases.
desk.
Okay, or like the iPads and like, so is that why it only appeared, because 2022 was our election year, so that expense appeared that year for,
Yeah.
so it's for kind of one, okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay. Okay, I understand, I just
Yep.
wondered what that was. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Mayor,
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't.
just a comment. Could we add some to it? Stuff here?
I've actually heard that before. I don't know where I've heard that from.
No, we have bankers boxes.
Don't know the combination.
Okay, please continue, Ms. Randall.
So, so we're looking at corporate services then, page 27. When we start corporate services with taxation, when you see an increase in taxation at this point, it's just that increased assessment new assessment that's added from 2024. So that's sort of the supplemental billing that we've had, new assessment, new builds, that kind of information has come forward. It's not any change of assessment. It's not any change in tax levy. It's just that new construction or renovations that have come through into the 2025 starting point. As Mr. Barbo said at the beginning, our big windfall is that increase to the OMPF. OMPF has been clawed back for several years. Not just at our level, but at the provincial level. And so this year they actually put more money back into the entire provincial OMPF system. And then as they did the allocation, we actually kind of win on that one. So it certainly is a nice surprise compared to where we've been. OMPF is that kind of transition that they did from as they switched from stuff had been, uploaded to the province and they downloaded it back to the municipalities. And this is supposed to help offset the stuff they have downloaded. In addition, it recognizes northern and rural communities that may have different challenges on assessment compared to urban centers. So that's where it comes through. Small things like interest income. So when you're looking at the large number there that is interest income, that's not just interest kind of from bank interest. So we actually collect interest from long-term debt that the municipality holds to power generation and to environmental services, as well as kind of bank interest that's sitting in there. Same as last year, we did a huge correction in the interest amount for budgeting over last year because we are winning a lot right now with interest rates. WNES is actually paying off its debt to us, so that's why there's a little bit less, because we're going to collect a little bit less interest from our partners. But that's the combination of interest on that long-term debt and bank interest that's there. small increase in licensing fees just to match what we have been doing more historically. And again, that's sort of coming out of COVID, coming out of the change. What are we really looking at? And so, things are getting a little bit more stable here. POA, we spoke about POA not that long ago at council, and it's just really a challenge. I'm leaving the amount in there, but what it really means, I'm not sure where we'll end up this year. We ended up with a little bit of revenue in 2023 that was I recognized in 2024 because that's when we were informed about it, but it's really been a challenge. Penalties and interest, you can see, has been sort of a growing amount there, and it is always a careful one to budget on. Because penalties and interest, when we budget on penalties and interest, we are then talking about what our outstanding arrears is. So, as we get better at collection, or as we clean up some collection, or as we determine things are not collectible, then this one will vary. But obviously, you can see we've had sort of a strong history on the penalties and interest, and our balances are stabilizing that way. Just a small aside, we will come back next meeting of council to talk about some of those unsuccessful tax sales. And we do have another round that's due to go out in tax sales. And tax sales is kind of our ultimate collection tool for our receivables. What we are finding is that we sort of get folks to year 2, and then they get a little bit scared and actually do come good at the end of year 2. So that's part of what's going on with our penalties and interest. As Mr. Barbo said at the beginning, the general reserve change, it was 1.2 million transfer from general reserve into revenues to sort of lower what the tax levy liability is going to be, was 1.2. It's been 1.2 for a few years. And then we've got a starting point of 900, but that is one of those things that's under council's discretion to look at. And that's why it's sitting in your key budget changes there. There's no new complement in the salaries and wages. When you look historically, we've had some changes because of changing how we had bylaw included in general government. The transition from clerk planner to just clerk last year impacts this, or this year impacts that as well. So there has been some strange things that you'll see in your historical there. Benefits are just sort of a flow through from salaries and wages. And so that is our CPPEI, that kind of thing, health benefits. There's nothing else in that one. Education, and you'll see that all the departments have kind of put some amount of increased education costs, both to look at just making sure we get stuff covered, and to include increased costs that are going on. And again, when you look back over the historical, you do see that COVID effect happening, that it took till we got back to traveling a bit. Looking down at the operating costs. So the IT and support section, that is both software and the general government portion of our IT department. It kind of comes in and out. And that's actually no new software. That doesn't address, that discussion about starting to look for other solutions that might happen for customer service or things like that. That's just our existing software. Now, general government does hold a lot of the software costs that impact multiple departments. So we share the costs of CGIS, which is both used for planning and building and all of our operations and things like that. The eScribe that produces all your agendas goes through that, as well as our general municipal software that sits in that. So we do have a number of pieces that serve the entire municipality, which is why we are general government or corporate services, is that's what we do. We serve the rest of the municipality. Others are sort of smaller ones. Increase in professional fees is just I put in an estimated amount, for potentially increase in audit fees. Our audit fees actually haven't grown much over the last few years at all. We did have a big year in audit fees last year because there was a new section of the accounting handbook that we had to include, and it took a lot of work with our auditors to get the new section set up. So again, as legislation changes, like everything else, we've got more reporting, they've got more reporting, so I've put a bit more into our audit fees. Sort of small changes through the rest of them. Property assessment, that is our fees that we pay to MPAC, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. So they handle the assessments for the entire province, and they charge us a fee for the fact that they take care of that for the province. I will just put a plug in now. There is at this point, there's no known plan to go back out and do reassessments. It got frozen because of COVID. MPAC themselves doesn't have control of the timing. The timing comes from provincial government. And so they are just waiting for the provincial government to put the mandate in on when they're going to bring the next round through. Actually, we all kind of anticipated that it was going to happen in 2024. We were just going to skip one cycle. Apparently, that's not the case. So we don't know when we're going to get the next round of assessment done. However, this is our estimated fee for what MPAC charges us. When you look at the actuals for both utilities and telecommunication and for our leases, so 2024 higher than budgeted. A lot of this is tied to our phone system and our server that just were sort of delayed in the rollover time. So that's why I'm not doing an increase in 2025, despite the fact that where 2024 is going to end, because we are finally at that end stages of all the rollover in those, so that we're going to see the savings in our phone system in the current year. If I'll flip you over to page 29, we'll go just through the reserve transfers. We won't, as Mr. Bobo said, we're not going to go through kind of all the capital projects that are kind of underneath it right now. I just will walk you through what the reserve in and outs are, and the reserve in and outs kind of then apply to all the departments as we start talking reserves in and out. So the transfer to reserve is the amount that is actually going to kind of be tax dependent. And so there was $235,000 last year. Put in a request for 245, just to sort of keep moving our transfer to reserve for IT and technology up. There's a lot of work to come, not this year, but a lot of work to come in the not too distant future. And so we just sort of keep moving that line up. And so this is the amount that, comes from taxation, goes into reserve. And then contribution from reserve and capital expenditures are kind of the offset of it. And so you'll see that those two amount net to zero, because we put our money each year out to reserve, and then we fund our capital back from reserve. So as our capital goes up and down, our reserve and our funding part goes up and down as well. And so that our capital change is therefore kind of a zero part there. So the only part that's kind of hitting the taxation or hitting the budget is that increase from 235 to 245. And you'll see that in all of our budgets when we talk about reserve. How they actually are spending the money that year may vary up and down. The part that is stable or not is that transfer to reserve, and that's the part that changed. I think all the other budgets are actually holding a status quo on their transfer to reserve portion for this year. So that brings us to the end of corporate services.
Just a couple of clarification questions. For next year, when we're looking back at the POA lines, I just want to plant the seed of being able to run some kind of comparison against POA as to when we implement AMPS and see, just to be able to kind of identify whether that change in policy here makes a difference in the revenues and how we do that, because I think that's going to be important information to kind of assess whether the AMPS is working for us.
Certainly will. And historically, POA acronyms, Provincial Offences Act, was downloaded to municipalities for in exchange for taking something else, and it was supposed to be a big revenue generator. At one time, we were getting, our share was about $180,000 net. And then it's been slowly dropping to, I think 1 year we even owe. So without letting the cat out of the bag, we're going to be, and typically North Bay is the central, City of North Bay is the central, they manage POA, the administration of it, so the POA and all of that, the court. But they're supposed to have CAO meetings. I haven't been to one in 2 years, not because I was doing something else. I haven't been invited. And so there's myself and I think East Barris, we're looking at perhaps looking at whether we still want to be in the POA business and serve notice and say, if it's going to be a revenue negative, why are we in it? And so that will be coming to council with respect to that. But I certainly, to your point, Madam Mayor, I certainly expect that AMPS will be providing us with some positive revenue as soon as we kick it in.
Okay, beautiful. Just another clarification question. On the line for penalties and interest, that does include the proceeds from tax sales?
No. No,
Okay, so where is that?
we don't actually get the proceeds from tax sales anymore.
Okay,
So what happens with the tax sale is that it pays off the balance of the tax penalties and interest, and our fees that we've incurred in order to advertise and do all the circulations and things like that. The rest of the money is paid into the courts. Now, it used to be that after a year, we could apply back into the courts and retrieve that money. The legislation changed just before COVID, and we're no longer able to do that. So we pay the money into the courts. The owner can go and get it. If the owner doesn't collect it, or someone with a stake on that money, then it just collapses to the province. Now we no longer see that money.
okay, so it's just basically tax sales or revenue. So we
Yeah.
collect the money that was owed to us in tax arrears and cost, administrative costs.
Yep.
And it all equals.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one more question. Is CGIS used in public works as well, or just, okay, thank you. If anybody else has questions for clarification, only not to debate numbers or anything, please, Councilor Pellerin.
Yeah, just a comment, I'm really surprised that that much $275,000 in penalties and interest just from the taxation.
Yeah, so it's a combination of taxation, but what we also do, and we started it a couple of years ago, and we do it really regularly now, is that when a water bill or a water account is sort of hit that 6 months overdue, we transfer them to taxes. And so then it becomes part of, we collect it as tax. So we're actually got our overdue taxes and our overdue water kind of that are sitting in that penalties and interest both. Yeah. Yeah.
And if
One
you
more
think of it,
thing,
if you think of it, there's $20 million of annual taxes, more or less. So, you know, it's a number that you never want to have high. That means people aren't paying their bills. But, you know, relative to the global amount.
on page 25, salaries and wages. Just wondering why it jumped from 175, 177 to 222 for next year.
So on council, there's, there's, you know, we have a policy on you know, what an increase is based on a CPI. I've put in here a bit of an allowance so that when the compensation review comes back to council, if there's changes to be made in the compensation review, that you've got that ability to do. So I put a bit of an allowance in there. We will have the compensation reviews both for council and staff back to you very shortly, but I've just sort of built something in here so we've got it as a placeholder.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, ma'am? Okay, thank you very much. So that wraps up services.
So we're on to Public Works on page 30. I will talk just a little bit about the revenue in Public Works. Over the last few years, we've had a charge for intercompany revenue between Public Works and WNES. And so I've removed it for this year because it's not a service that's actually being provided, and that gives a problem to WNES. However, offsetting that is the fact that our aggregate revenue has been strong for the last few years, and our aggregate revenue is the licensing fee that we receive from the pits that are in our area. And it comes not directly from the pits to us, but it comes the pits up to the province, and the province shares back a portion of it with the municipalities where aggregate pits are located. So we've had some very strong performance on our aggregate pits. So I did increase I did take all the credit for you there. The department did increase the licensing revenue. Additionally, there's a little bit, so when we have private entrances go in, so that's someone who needs to put a new entrance in because they're opening up a lot or they're doing a building and they install a culvert to come in. There's a portion of that we retain for all of our inspection and our time that goes out there. So a little bit of budget from that. So you'll only see a little bit of increase compared to last year, but we are losing that intercompany transfer. So that's why you've got some of the differences going on there. So Public Works is the only department that has asked for sort of a full new FTE. And, you know, we've sort of don't formally have sort of a title, but sort of a contract supervision, project management type position. The cost is, would be shared with water and sewer. So what you're seeing, this budget is just half of that person. And if council sort of approves that concept, then there's going to be half of that person that hits the water and sewer budget as well. So it is a split. And Public Works and water and sewer do share a lot of costs that way because of how closely they're interrelated with our distribution and collection portion of things. So the requesting a person just, to assist with not just on our projects, but also to look at all that development that's going on and being able to be out in our inspecting where we've got developers putting in new infrastructure so that we know when we assume the infrastructure, that the infrastructure is good. Right now, we're relying on third parties that are paid for by the contractors and things like that. And this just gives us a little bit of oversight onto that, and then oversight on our own projects. So there are still some projects that we will use third-party consultants for on managing some of our larger ones, from tendering all the way through to inspection. And that's built into the capital, but then looking at someone that can just manage some of our smaller projects. And this became a real concern when Sudbury initially lost that case with the Ministry of Labor with the death of a pedestrian at a construction site. And so though the decision as far as Sudbury's liability was eventually kind of found in favor of Sudbury, that they had acted in the best interest, they'd done everything. What didn't hold was the fact that Sudbury, even though they had a contractor, was considered an employer, which creates a lot of risk when we're looking at all of our capital projects. If the municipality is an employer, how much of our due diligence, what are we actually doing? What is the protection on it? And so, this is, someone who's dedicated to that contract management, sort of can help mitigate some of that risk. Additionally, they're talking about just sort of protecting, getting better quoting when they're doing capital planning and things like that, to have someone who can do better capital planning up front, so we can get things a little bit tighter on our capital planning. So that's what I'd say. All that to say, other than that, they've got sort of a half body included in that new salaries and wages line, and then the benefits that come out of that. And again, that small increase in training that we're seeing across all the budgets. Licenses and permits for Public Works. That's actually just sort of a correction that on our licensing of vehicles. That's just our licensing of vehicles. As it's not new fleet. It's not in that. It's just a correction that to sort of what the last few years actual have been. Materials as a global budget like that includes, granular sand, salt, calcium. All of that sits into materials. The increase for the 25,000 is actually an increase in calcium costs. Sort of looking at holding the line on the other materials. So that's just an increase in calcium. When you look back across the years as far as comparative, this is one of those ones that does vary a lot depending on what kind of winter we have and when winter starts, what inventory balances are at the end of the year. So we are winning some compared to budget this year, but it really can vary with the year and what kind of season we have. Office supplies is just a small amount of an increase sort of across the board there. If I flip you to page 31, looking at services and rents, so this is, typically contracted services. And so at Public Works, they are looking at, that we've had some increase over the years, particularly falling around, the arrangement that we have with Dokis and the Dokis Road arrangement that we will pay contractors for additional grading and additional plowing out there sometimes. We did have that switch from in 2024, rather than purchasing the Vector truck, that we were leasing the Vector truck with the hope of reducing our contractor amount and things like that, or controlling our contractor amount. So some of this is built in there as well. So a little bit of increase in services and rents for the year. The increase in utilities and telecommunication, same as everyone else. It sits around hydro and heating gas. And the vehicle expense is tough. It's tough. So vehicle expense, so it includes fuel and various things like that. And when you look back at the history, we had some wins and some losses on fuel costs over COVID. We certainly had in the early years of COVID some real big wins on fuel costs. Currently, right now, our fuel costs for the fleet is within budget and reasonable. What we are seeing is the last 2 years, these huge driving costs on repairs and maintenance. Now, in 2023, there were some larger unexpected breakdowns. You'll see that 2024 looks not wonderful. And that's, we've mentioned that in our quarterly updates, both in Q2 and Q3. Again, Public Works has taken a look at the work that we typically do versus things that, break rather suddenly. Obviously, there's some allowance for things that break rather suddenly, but have increased it 150,000 to get to that vehicle expense line for next year. It's a tough one on the line. And again, like we've talked at the when we've done those quarterly statements, both Public Works and Fire, are seeing just increases in shop costs. We've got these equipment that need specialized diagnostics. We've got travel. It just is a really difficult spot with fleet maintenance right now. Then looking down at the bottom part of the budget, and here, and I know this part looks confusing. The part I want you to look at is the transfer to reserve line. So the transfer to reserve line of 2.1 million hasn't changed from last year, and that's the only part that sort of hits the taxation, is that if there was any new part there. So there's no new transfer to reserve being asked for. What we've put in here is just, the funding that we expect to receive for 2025, the amounts that have been in reserve for, carrying forward for 2025. When we look at the actual capital plan, if council approves the level of expenditure, there is sufficient in reserve to sort of look at it, and some of that will change. But the only part that changes that has any tax implication is that transfer to reserve, and they're not asking for any additional transfer to reserve this year. And I'll hand it back to you, Madam Mayor, for the end of that one. Sorry. I saw you deep in thought there.
Yeah, no, I was deep in thought there. So, and then the last section on that page 31, capital assets, will go into detail in the capital portion of the budget. Questions in regards to what's just been presented? Just on the calcium thing, that's not an increase in service levels. That's just an increase in the base cost of supplies that we're absorbing at maintaining current service levels.
Yes.
Okay, and I think that's it. That was just the only clarification I'd like. Anybody else? Okay. And drains.
So drains
Sounds fascinating.
Drains we'll talk about a little bit here. So drains, and I understand there's been a lot of interest in the drains budget recently, which I think is very cool. So the drain budget, I think it's very cool. I'm sure Ms. Henning thinks it's very cool too. So the drain budget is broken into a few parts. So the superintendent fees, we have a contract currently with K-Smart to be our superintendent. Superintendent fees, we get a 50% offset from the province. And so we just sort of budget for 50% of the fees. We are getting closer to taking that entirely in-house. Correct? Yep. And so we'd still be eligible for that 50% grant. It just means it would be our own forces that become the superintendent, and we would have the revenue for it. The other part is actually the drain maintenance part. And so, and again, what you see here is just the municipal portion connected to drain maintenance. And so the municipality incurs parts when they look at drain assessments, and they look at drain catchment areas, and they say if the road actually benefits from the fact that there's a drain there, then the municipality has a partial assessment. And that really varies from year to year, depending on where we're doing work, what kind of work we're doing, whether the roads are impacted, or if it's just drains that are way back in a field somewhere, in which case there's often very little road connection there. So you see, I have done sort of just a modest increase on it. And when you look back kind of across the recent time, again, we had sort of nothing going on during COVID. And then we did some catch up, and then it kind of sorted out for a few years. The last couple of years, Public Works has got kind of really into planning and doing maintenance work on the drains. And that sort of takes us back to a time pre-COVID when we actually were scheduling all this maintenance work and doing a lot of maintenance work on drains. So again, we're just looking at the municipal portion of it, and we've done this increase. What we built into the drain budget a few years ago was this transfer to reserve. And we used to use a transfer to reserve kind of on and off to cover if we were doing construction. And a couple of years ago, we built it in as a transfer to reserve to help offset those times when we might have a construction project that comes and we have to absorb the municipal portion of it. And also to just kind of help absorb that time where sometimes we're doing drains that have got a lot of road work on them, and other times we have smaller amounts. Now, we have put amounts into reserve for a few years, and I think we're probably almost at kind of a stabilizing part with the reserve, so we don't need to do heavy investments in the reserve. We'll be able to kind of just stabilize that reserve line, and then it just will offset years where they've done a lot of work. We'll be able to pull from the reserve, and then other years it'll just be sitting there waiting for construction. And so that's sort of what's going on with drain. You won't ever see the full amount of work coming through here because it is just the maintenance, it is just the municipal portion. And they're kind of a weird thing. And they're not our assets. It's just work that we are, kind of tasked to do because we go across multiple properties and multiple owners that way. And the province has this drain maintenance set up in order to facilitate that kind of work that happens.
It wouldn't be right if I didn't have one. Superintendent fees. So we budgeted 20,000 2024 and 2025, and the costs were really low in 23 and 24, but then they were really high 2022. So is there an explanation as to that variance from, say, why was 2022 so much and 2024 not?
So as I said, we're dealing with a contractor, and so as things were sort of quieter over COVID, although our contractor was still dealing with folks calling and looking at work, and we did a little bit of work over that period. So 2022 was sort of the kickback in of a lot of work, which is why the superintendent fee came up. Now, what's happened since that time is as Public Works has got back involved, is that we're doing a lot of that work internally.
Okay.
And so it'll actually be Ms. Henning and Mr. Bernard that are doing a lot of that work. They're still sitting in the Public Works budget. If we actually sort of get, when we actually take back the superintendent entirely within the municipality, do some sort of cost allocation, but that's why you're seeing the drop, is that we've been able to rely less on the external than we've had to over the few years.
Anybody else? Councilor Pellerin.
Just following that, those thoughts, let's say Ms. Hennings and Mr. Mel do some work, so you take part of their salary that goes into that. Is that what you mean?
Right now, it's not, but yes, if say Mr. Remillard, if the council appoints Mr. Remillard as the drainage superintendent instead of the contractor, then yes, when he's working on drains, his salary comes over here, and then we get 50% of it back on from the grant. Yes.
And that's going on now.
No, not yet. We're close. Yeah, we're close.
Trending now.
Yeah.
Those are small numbers.
Yeah.
Like I would expect it to be more because everything is so expensive. My other question is the contractor like K-Smart, okay, we've got the surveyors and all this. If we're going to take this over, how are you, like, is it going to be everything in-house, a surveyor and?
So in order to become the drainage superintendent, in order that you have to have done the surveying course, and we've got actually a number of folks that have got the surveying in place. So both Mr. Remillard, Mr. Sullivan, a few of our Public Works employees. Did you? No. Okay. So the construction part of stuff that we do, the construction part of stuff still stays external. That's a separate contract we have with K-Smart. It's just the superintendent part, which is that going out and inspecting and saying, yep, that beaver dam has to come out. Yep, we're going to ditch down to this level. And certainly we've got the surveying skills to say, yep, we're going to ditch down to this level. Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just one more question to follow up on that. So until the transition is actually complete, the time that our staff is spending on drainage is not reimbursed through that grant. So right now, so when
Yeah.
Mr. Remyard is spending time on drains, that is, just stays within his public works salary. So once the transition is complete, there'll actually be a cost benefit to us.
Yep.
Thank you.
So I remember the grants with the municipal drain, I don't think the municipality gets the 1/3 off, right?
No.
Just the.
So that's a farm grant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else on drains? Great. Moving on to community services.
So when you're looking at the last several years, when you're looking at the actuals for community services, they were the department that was most significantly impacted by COVID. And so you certainly can see sort of some strange things and up and downs in you know, what their revenues have been. That provincial grant line, that was our COVID grants that the province provided for us to offset lost revenue. So we did receive grants. General government took a little bit of the grant for lost licensing fees and things like that as well. Primarily it sat with community services because they were the most impacted, not only in the revenue, but in the expense line as well, because we had facilities shut down. So we didn't have staff and utilities and we had laid folks off and all that kind of stuff. So their comparators are a little bit odd when you look at them. Certainly as we look at 2024, we've seen a real increase in kind of that return to pre-COVID levels in activity and, you know, activity down at the recreation complex. So when we were looking down sort of program revenues, and that is our stuff that goes on at the pool, at the museum, keeping in mind that community services, that roll up of all of those bits. Community services also has all of our facilities except for the fire specific facilities and public works specific facilities. So all of our tenanted facilities are all within community services. It's sort of community services and facilities there, which is why the rentals includes all of our lease from tenants as well as hall rentals and things like that roll through. Yeah, so in salaries and wages, and you look at, there is not a new body, but an increase, ask for increase in hours for part-time staff. So it's not a new body, but it is sort of like a half FTE or full-time equivalent, sort of like a half person in hours. It's additional requested, and that's just to provide support, particularly to our facility and project managers and to the director in dealing with, you know, processing payroll and invoices, staying with contractors, staying on top of health and safety, just that documentation part of things that's happening that our managers are actually doing now. But their time could be spent, if we had clerical support to do those things, their time could be spent on doing the higher level planning and less on just filing stuff. So that's why we've got sort of this ask for additional hours going into the community services, into their part-time pool there. You also see an increase in education costs for community services. So our maintenance employees, you know, kind of are required to be trained as a certified pool operator, to have refrigeration. It ties not only to, you know, kind of the health and safety, as in don't go in places when there's, you know, refrigeration, when you've got alarms going, so, you know, that ends really badly. But also so that we can have, it does, you know, but also so we can have sort of, you know, perhaps a more efficient operation of our facilities and of those units, as well as just regular health and safety training. If we look at, flipping over to page 34 then, have an increase in the subcontractor line. So again, you know, community services is responsible for all of these facilities. And that includes things like snow removal that we do at facilities, as well as just sort of the maintenance contractors. They have a lot of maintenance that runs operating maintenance versus need to do great big capital maintenance things. So a lot of the maintenance sits at this level, and we are responsible for, say, snow removal at you know, Ambulance Bay, OBP, the community health center. The community health center added an additional piece of parking lot to it. So there is a lot of stuff that goes through there. The community initiatives is one of those things you're going to see drop and get reallocated. So that's part of what got reallocated up to your discretionary grants. It came out of that line and it came out of a couple lines, which is why some of that, it just needs to sort of solidify it into one place. Community projects is this catch-all, and you know, when we're you know, when you're later sort of debating and having discussions about the things there, Mr. Poulin's got the details, but that is all that community work that gets done. So it's Santa Claus Parade, it's Cranberry Fest, it's all those sort of special events that go on. It's some of that reach out that happens within the community. And again, you'll see it kind of up and down over the years, again, because of COVID and then some staffing challenges that we've had in between. But it really is all those pieces that we do here out in our outreach in the outside communities and things like that sit under the community projects. Increase in professional fees. So community services has budgeted amounts both kind of in operating and in capital, you'll see for fees. And so some of that is to have, you know, shovel-ready projects, and some of that's also just to sort of keep on top of planned work that happens, as well as a little bit of legal to be looking at leases and things like that. But they're trying really to now sort of be proactive in getting those plans so that we know what facility costs are going to be, so that we know what those maintenance costs. You did see those facility assessments and those sort of longer term plans. But each year, as we actually get closer to, yep, in 2025, we're going to start doing the specific design for work that's going to get done in 2026, 2027. It helps us to get those better numbers, because it is one of those things, you know, where we, you know, the budget numbers that we had from 2021 are really significantly different, because it just, contractors have just changed that amount. And so this allows them to do that planning. As we saw in some of the capital work that Public Works did this year, our cost for those consultants is increasing significantly year over year. It's just as far as we saw some real big increases from our consultants just to do that design work. And so community services has just sort of asked for this increase so they can just be better at their long-term planning with things. Services and rents, again, we're seeing that kind of pressure on all of our departments. Again, with community services being more facility driven than any of the others, that they're just seeing it more. Again, that comes out of, you know, our mat rentals, our HVAC contracts. And so again, we have, you know, we've got contracted services to do that kind of maintenance for us. We have, you know, so HVAC, but it's across all of our facilities. However, all those facilities sit within community services. The same with things like alarm testing and fire suppression and all of that. Contracted services to ensure that those things keep running for us, not just at our facilities, but at all of our tenanted facilities as well. And that all sits within community services. You will see some change over the years, kind of with the utilities and telecommunication, and a little bit with the rents when you're looking back across things. And that is that we made the switch in, I think, 2021, that this facility used to sit under general government and this facility got moved to community services. So if you see some wild swings and stuff, it's the moving of this facility into community services. So again, yeah, just that utility is the same as we're seeing with everything else. But again, because community services is a bit more hydro heavy, both with the arenas and with the fact that they have all the facilities, they're just seeing that bigger increase on things. In this case, you're seeing a decrease in the non-TCA, and that's just, we're getting better at moving the planning to assets and into the capital planning, and not using our operating to buy Zambonis and things like that, that we're actually putting in a capital where it belongs. So that's why you're seeing the decrease there in the purchases of those kind of assets. And then their capital, again, we're looking at the transfer to reserve at the bottom of page 34. That's the line that you need to look at as far as impact on taxes. No change in the transfer to reserve in community services. Again, how they actually spend that reserve, or what they do, is part of the capital plan that you'll see later on. But the part that hits the tax is that transfer to reserve, and there's no change in that transfer to reserve from community services this year. Their transfer to reserve funds fleet, facilities, and equipment. So they have sort of the three portions that they deal with from reserve.
Oh, I'm Chair. Okay, first on the revenue section in your provincial grants. Now, we received an NOHFC grant for $500,000 for the field outdoor rink, but it doesn't seem to be in that line for any of those years. So is it missing?
No, it was capital, right? Because it
Okay.
offset capital.
So these are our federal and provincial grants that are for operating budgets
Yep.
only, and then the capital will show, okay? Secondly, so the revenues rentals, those are our lease agreements with our different tenants. That's not like arena rentals. That is like Canada Post, StatsCan, Economic Partners, the Community Health Center, all of those, that's the revenue from our tenants in our different municipally owned facilities.
It does also include hall rental. So arena rental is separately, arena is in its own line, but our hall rental is part of this line as well. I mean, the overwhelming part of that is our tenanted
Yeah.
facilities, but there is hall rental that's in that.
Is it possible to get that
Yeah.
separated out it doesn't need to be for this year's budget, but it's a very
No, it's a good
different
point.
number. Because the hall rentals tells a different story than what our
Exactly.
lease revenues tell. So, okay. Those are my two questions for that section. Anybody else with questions on the community services budget? Councillor Pellerin?
Isn't that right?
Feel like it's a two-man show here.
You mentioned the health center. I'm just curious. Do we own the health center?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and so we lease it out? Okay, I didn't know that. The reserve, transfer to reserve, I always have problem with the reserves. And so there's a reserve just for the community service. So each section have their own reserve.
Yes.
Okay, so the transfer to reserve, is it the 1 million, is it in there, what's in the reserve, or do we don't transfer that every year in the reserve?
Yes, so every year you allocate an amount to transfer to reserve. And so it is the 1 million that we're putting into reserve right now every year. And then out of that 1 million, they say, I've got $1 million worth of work to do, and we take it from reserve and kind of offset the work that's done. It might be that, in community services case, they had actually built up the reserve for a couple of years because they had bigger projects coming. And so that happens as well. So, you can put 1 million in reserve, you only do 500,000 this year. The other 500 stays there and you don't have to go and get it again. And so then the following year you put 1 million in. So I now have 1.5 million sitting in my reserve and I can do a bigger project. So you will see that. And it's to, as we get sort of, when you talk about asset management planning and you hear things like infrastructure deficit and things like that, this is to get to the point where you have a smooth amount going in and you can do all the work up and down underneath, but just a smooth amount. Not that we have to put $500,000 in this year and $3 million in next year. It's just to sort of smooth that so that we can plan the work. Yeah.
Okay, it makes sense, but when I look at this, now I understand, but it'd be nice to see the total that's in the reserve. It would give me in a way a better picture.
Normally you have that, right?
Yeah, and same as last year, because we're sort of at this projected stage, and I can bring it back. I can kind of bring it back, kind of what the projected year-end spots are going to be on all the various reserves. So we have two different styles. We have reserves that we put through like this, and then we have reserves that are related to things like gas tax and OCIF that are sort of dedicated. But absolutely, we can bring back so that you can see where we expect to be on those reserves by end of year, so that you know what's left. Yeah.
I think what you want is the departmental to know what's in the bank. It's like the savings account. And then what Lisa has talked to you about very well is your capital assets under that department. They make a determination and average out what you have to put in every year to average that out. Typically, you have to raise those a little bit because that's why they talk about that infrastructure deficit, and every municipality in the province is underfunded. So we try and get that up, but that's what the hit on the tax is. So certainly what we can do is show you where the reserve is, but we're not sitting on a ton of cash in these dedicated reserves, we're looking at a 2 or 3 year window and saying, oh, in 2 years, we're planning on spending 2 million, and that's why there's some in the bank. But if you look at our long-term forecasting, it's going to be spent. So we average out, the 1.1, and typically when we start seeing, we're going to need more money, we start to raise that to a degree every year so that we can basically not hit the taxpayers with a massive hit, right?
Nope, makes a lot of sense. I understand them.
Yeah, the reverse in the olden days was what they used to call pay as you go. And that was crazy, because then what would happen is that you'd have to go, I have an 18% tax increase this year because you have a bridge that you need to replace, and this year you don't. So it was all over the map. And so this actually stabilizes your funding going forward.
Makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to planning and building.
Yeah, and actually I was thinking that I didn't think I was talking really fast, but we're moving through this really fast. So maybe I am talking really fast, and I see some nodding, okay.
I think you're doing great. That's great.
Not by your standards. I've heard you speak fast.
Yeah, so planning and building has put a bit of an increase into revenue for building permits. They are always cautious in their planning. We have typically exceeded revenues in building and planning. They are going to be the heroes this year, as far as what they have. Now, it does really vary, and certainly this year we've had a few sort of large commercial projects and things like that we can't always bank on. So it is a bit of a smoothing that we see when we're estimating revenues in building permits as well. And sometimes it's a follow through. If planning has seen a lot of activity, what we know might come down the road for building afterwards. Planning has slowed down this year. It had a really hot start to the year and has slowed down as we sort of got to the second part of the year here. So a little bit of a clawback in planning revenue because of that for the following year. And then other revenue is just a little bit of they have a little bit of income connected to 911 costs and various things like that. They've just pulled back a little bit on the things that fall into kind of other revenue from planning and building. So in 2024 was the year that we did the switcheroo to have a full-time planner. So we had the full-time planner in place sort of mid-year. And so then, there's no new increase, no change in the complement that's looked for in planning and building for the new year. Again, like everyone else, a little bit of change in education. With changes of legislation, all of our folks do need to sort of regularly go through and finish doing those upgrades and updating and things like that, and participate in the conferences to stay part of things. Not a lot of other changes in building and planning. Now, one of the things we've seen for a couple of years is that we were funding the official plan review and the bylaw review, so that is expected to wrap into 2025. We did put money in 2023. We put money into reserve because we hadn't got things started. In 2024, obviously things are well on the go. If there's any part at the end of 2024 that hasn't been expended in 2024, I am going to ask council to hold it to reserve so that we carry that part over, because we have awarded the contract. And when we awarded the contract, we knew that it was going to be this phased in approach, and we were going to have the budget in 2025 to sort of finish the project. And so, we have this slight change because we're finishing that project in 2025, and we'll have the end of the billing in that special projects part of things. And so that's sort of the only kind of real bit there. We added the vehicle this year in 2024. And so we've dropped mileage expense a little bit, translated it over to vehicle expense to offset, but it's just that we've just I've transferred money from one line to the other line to look at what we have for the vehicle expense. So yeah, not a lot of change in the building and planning budget.
Questions? Councillor Pender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed it. So the special project, that was the official plan?
Yes.
So that was the total? No, it can't be the.
No, so that's what we spread it over 3 years.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So the amount you see in 2023, the 37.5, we transferred that into reserve in 2023 and kept it aside. And then we have the amount in 2024 and then finishing it up in 2025. And so, yeah, it's sort of a 3-year project.
It's over 100,000 for the official plan.
The 90s,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Tax.
Thank you. Anybody else? Huh?
I like the shorter ones. So economic development, again, when we look at, you know, how it looks as when you look at sort of comparatives is really challenging. Over this time period, when we're looking at comparators, we didn't have staff. We had staff. We had staff for part of the year. We now have got the department staffed again. Again, the revenue is always tied to grants. Grants get recognized when the work actually happens, right? So it's the grant is not always there because it depends on the work that is coming. So at the end of last year, we actually transferred a net amount to reserve to offset what we were expecting in grant and what we were expecting in expense for the special projects. That's kind of has rolled through. So the special projects still include the warehouser project. So that's kind of the part that we gathered into reserve last year. And again, I'm going to bring the same thing back to this year, that I want to gather that net amount into reserve so that we have got it, that offset grant for this year. So we've got stuff still in reserve because it was a little bit more than we started with in 2023. Included in their 2025 line is phase 2 of ESA on Corsall Road, potential remediation action on the warehouser site, and potential some design and engineering on the warehouser site if we get through all the environmental stuff first and things like that. Again, they've put a little bit of grant revenue attached to those projects, and that'll be subject to being successful in these grant applications or not. The other big change that you're going to see in economic development is simply that we've put it in here for council's discussion, is that we received a request from Western St. General Hospital to increase our doctor recruitment contribution from $20,000 to $125,000 per year, and they're looking for a 5-year commitment on that. And so that's why you see that really big increase with economic development. And so those are the really sort of the big changes that are sitting in there. A little bit of a reduction in advertising, just to kind of reflect the fact that, again, corporate services absorbs a lot of the advertising costs, and it used to kind of be this split thing between corporate services and economic development. It now is really held in corporate services. And so economic development is just reducing theirs, and no advertising will deal with just the economic development specific projects and things like that. So again, the big change is that doctor recruitment ask for $125,000 up from 20. The request used to be 20. We had budgeted 25. We always had a budget for 25, but the extra 5,000 was sort of in-kind stuff, or stuff that the municipality might do in the event that we had a doctor that was coming. And so it was welcome baskets and memberships at the complex and things like that. There was this extra 5,000 that council had sort of set aside for things the municipality might do if there was a doctor that had come or that they had managed to recruit. The 20,000 is just the amount that we've been transferring to this other committee for the doctor recruitment. And we still call it doctor recruitment. I know that they came at one point and asked that we call it sort of health professional, because they wanted to have some flexibility in what they did with the funds. And so, yeah, we've got that request for this year.
Just a couple of questions on the revenues for grants. Now, we did the phase 1 environmental assessment this year, and we had a grant for that. Did we?
Not for the
Was
phase
there
1.
not a grant on the phase 1? That was solely self-funded by the municipality. Okay, and then even though we've had the announcement of the grant for the phase 2, that would only show once the work was completed and we had the reimbursement from the other levels of government. Okay, and on doctor recruitment, obviously that's a pretty big ask from the hospital. We're not going to discuss the merits of that at this time, but is there some kind of information that was provided along with the request with some kind of justification or information for council that we might review, you know, the merits of that ask?
I think there was a letter, and we'll have that as part when you're ready to deliberate it. I think,
Yeah, I just appreciate,
I think there was a letter and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, I just appreciate kind of what it is that they're looking to do with that, because that's a pretty big jump in the ask. And Councillor Gagne?
Madam Mayor, and to your point, could we know what kind of recruitment was done in the last 4 years also, since that's technically what they're trying to do?
Certainly, we can try and scare it up. I will say that there's a committee when we started doing this, and the committee had met fairly regularly. It didn't really report back to council that much, or as much as it should have. And then COVID, the famous COVID and all of that. And now with the new, who's now just left us, but with the new CEO, we had revived, and the committee is a little bit more active now, or wanting to get together. So, yeah, we can have a look at what the recruitment strategies are. And at that point, I'll have some comments with respect to hospital doctor recruitment versus community doctor recruitment, you know, and which, you know, what should we be getting involved with and not getting involved with. But that's it. I'll have that information, council, when we deliberate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just as an aside, I have participated in several of the meetings we started. I just don't recall hearing that at the committee level, so it's a bit of
What at the committee?
about the $100,000 increase in the ask, but maybe
I think
maybe I was a little vacant when I was there, so I'm not saying it wasn't. Was it?
you would never be that vacant. I think that you weren't there.
Okay.
I think that the last meeting, and I wasn't there either,
Okay.
but I will get you the information.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Restal.
I was recently just woken up with my cough, but no, just with the shift that we had in committee appointments, I've been moved to that committee. I sat there in my previous time on council, and the only meeting that I was able to attend ended up getting postponed recently. So I know there's been some talk. I also sit not as a municipal representative, but community representative on the hospital board. And I know there's been discussion at the board level to try and revive that committee, get it more active, and engage the municipality as a bigger partner in doctor recruitment for the community. You know, and really quick, there's challenges with doctors. We all know that with health professionals and having a full-time doctor for residents. And the other piece that's would be definitely addressed to help the community in general is our emergency room. Challenges with staffing doctors there, and we've come close at times to having to declare a closure of the emergency room, and we wouldn't want that because we wouldn't want to have our community members have to travel to North Bay or Sudbury at different times of the evening or night for medical assistance. So a lot of things. I could talk for an hour on that, but just to share, I think some of this and the letter may have come from the board than from the committee, but we'll look into that. Our CEOs that will look into it as well.
Thank you so much. Councillor Pellerin?
It's on the same line as Councillor Gagne and you. Me too, I'd like to see what kind of recruitment we've done in the last few years. And only because I've heard on the, was it a program, whatever, Huntsville are going ahead and they're wages and incentive, cash incentive, if the doctor stays for X amount of years, 3 years, 5 years. I'd like to know, yeah, let's, okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Councillor Larrabee?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also would like to know how many partners. We're saying that we're going to be partners in recruiting doctors. Is there any other organization in the municipality that would join this partnership, or are we the only one?
I'm not aware of any other partners. That would be a board discussion as to who they want to bring in, but as indicated, I'll try and get you as much information if we're deliberating those levels tomorrow. I'll try and get you that by tomorrow evening what I have. If not, we're not deliberating it, then I'll continue to find information.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to fire service.
So before we get rolling with fire service, I will just point out, and it's noted in the strategic changes, is that I very recently received that presentation on the fire master plan. And when presenting it, he talked about some of the high level things that are on the recommendations, as well as some of the operational things. So this budget doesn't include any of those kind of high level strategic changes, because those need to come back. And we said they'd come back sort of individually to council as different subject matters and take a look at different things. So this doesn't include it in kind of any of that change. Those operational things that the chief can do just in his day-to-day operations, he's made some of those changes as well, but any of those big things are not included here, because we need to have those discussions at council, and they will impact, subsequent years and things like that. So looking at fire service, when I'm looking at sort of just kind of their revenue source and why the revenue is sort of different. What we budget for in the fire services is a budget for fire permits that go in, and we budget for provincial response. Our fire service responds to highway accidents and bills back the MTO. And so we receive revenue from the MTO for the fact that we go and park great big red trucks out on the highway to protect the scene and to do extrication and be the first on scene. So there's a lot of revenue that actually comes from that provincial response. Now, things that hit the budget that are outside of those things are, so we have the plan in place to do some of that insurance recovery. And so we contract with a service that when there's been fires, particularly at commercial buildings, that they can go out and get some of the insurance recovery for us. So you'll see that go into revenue. However, part of the arrangement with that is it must go into reserve and be used for training and equipment and things like that. So it doesn't just go back into your general pool. So sometimes the revenue can be high, but then we'll also have a change in what the transfer to reserve is, because that money we get from that insurance proceeds goes into reserve. In the current year, they also had some disposition of equipment, and actually had proceeds that exceeded what was the book value of the equipment left. So you'll see that. But again, we don't typically budget for that disposition of equipment, because it's not an every year thing. It's not an all the time thing. And certainly, that getting proceeds above book value wouldn't be one of those things that we will fund. So sometimes you'll see this up and down with the revenue on the fire service. Yeah, salaries and wages, they've got a collective agreement that's settled. We've been one more year out of their collective agreement, so we've got just that increase built into there. And again, that increase in training. You look back over the last few years of training, so there was a couple things, again, COVID. But in that time of COVID, we also had that closure of the fire college, and we talked about it last year a little bit, but it still is applying. So as we kind of open back up to training a number of our members and looking at that training session and things like that, those days where we could just send folks down to the fire college and, for $150 and everything else was covered, they are gone. And so we are now looking at, we'll have to send folks out of town for training, that the course itself has a cost connected to it, and the accommodations now has a cost to it. We used to have that all wrapped up, and the province just took care of those things for us. So we're seeing an increase in our training. Now, we do have the advantage that we have some training that is available online that we can take advantage for our full-time members in some of their upgrading. But again, we do see this increase in ask of education, just because we know what's coming down as far as what our costs of traveling and transportation is now with our training. Yeah, a lot of kind of just sort of reallocation of small lines on fire there. A little bit of increase just to software updates, and again, we added, a copier back in. That's just sort of these small things that are added back into the fire budget. And so, office supplies, that it does include their copier lease, and so they haven't had a copier. We now have a more copier back in place for them. And so it's just sort of little things that are going on with the fire budget. None of that is sort of significant amounts. Repairs and maintenance, just again to look at sort of a little bit like our fleet repairs and maintenance, are just our general equipment repairs and maintenance are seeing increases. And a lot of stuff, the fire department, they must do annual testing on their compressors, the ladders, the pumps, the SCBA. They have a lot of equipment. And again, it's the same as the vehicle cost. It's just that the cost of testing have increased. And perhaps it's just catch up. I mean, we haven't seen increases in those lines for a lot of years. We've actually been able to pull back those lines a couple times in the past, and we're just now seeing the reverse, that these are just more to do on an annual basis. And then the same with the vehicle repairs and maintenance, is that, it just sort of, this year was just that year that costs just escalated. And like Public Works, some of it is just straight getting safeties done on vehicles. It's not, necessarily large breakdowns. It's not anything. It's just that routine work. About 2 years ago as well, the province brought in legislation that changed just requirements around tires. And so, how we have to rotate tires on trucks and what the life expectancy on tires are. And it just sort of changes again, that it adds this bit across all of our fleet in all of our areas. And it just has sort of escalated. So you will see that significant increase in vehicle expense, and that is just tied to repairs and maintenance. Again, fuel costs, oil costs, that stuff has been all reasonable. Not a lot of change or problem in those lines. It's just the repairs and maintenance line that we're seeing the pain point on. Again, like the other departments, you'll see the transfer to reserve part is the part that they're holding the line on. Now, we know that, and we'll bring 5 years back to council, and you'll see stuff as I said, through some of that fleet and the asset management, that we're going to run into a deficit fairly quickly on fire fleet. And the only reason that we're not sort of showing some increase here is that we're actually 2 years behind. So there's 2 years of fleet that council has approved, and we haven't been able to acquire the vehicles. So and we've had sufficient in reserve to do a third vehicle this year if we can get them all in place. But the likelihood that we're going to be able to be caught up in all of our fleet replacement and need that extra $100,000 or extra $600,000 this year is not likely. So we've kind of held the line, but we do have this position that we know we are going to run into problems with fire fleet. And again, in the past, we were fortunate. We could find secondhand demos. We brought a lot of fleet out of the States, and even that is not the pricing that we used to be able to get. And there have been some difficulties in converting the US equipment to Canadian equipment. So it's not always the best strategy for everything, but it's just, as you've seen when we've awarded contracts recently in Public Works, the cost of these heavy vehicles has just escalated so much. So this year we're okay, but it's going to creep up on us really fast with that fleet replacement in fire. Additionally, fire has been, they contribute to fleet replacement. They also contribute to equipment replacement and to facility. And so the facility, they have been sort of using it for some stuff you'll see in their capital, but this is where we keep putting money into the facility reserve because we know of things that are coming down the road. And so that's why it's one of those things where the reserve is actually sort of building up for future projects, although they do stay on top of all of our facilities now. So again, the part that hits the tax is the fact that there's no change in that 675 ask. The rest is just how they spend it after that point in the reserve portion.
My hand again. Just a couple of questions. On the revenue side, if we're budgeting for certain things are predictable, more predictable, or kind of like book revenues, in future years, can we get that broken out so that, like that revenue goes different than what is it, the insurance and, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Just separates it out. Okay. Yes, just future years. Secondly, under operating cost licenses and permits, the budget amounts for 2024 and 2025 are, 14,000, 11,000, but the actual, can you explain that again, why the actual down the line are all less than $1,000? So what's the missing piece here?
I'll have to look. I believe the missing piece is probably that we've coded it differently as we brought a new fire chief in, but I'll have to go back and look because certainly we get, so we have different licensing requirements with fire trucks than we do with public works, but I'll have to go and take a look. I don't have this for you.
Okay, because that whole
Yep.
line doesn't make
Yep.
any sense why we would budget
Yep.
14,000 when the actuals are go right across the board on that. And the same with the services and rents. So has there been a change in the way that you're interpreting that?
So services and rents is one that can go up and down because included in services and rents is also when we have other departments come and do response for us.
Okay.
And that doesn't always, we don't always have that every year, yeah.
Okay, so we like to budget that so that in case we need it, we're
Yeah.
not short, because again, we're under 15 all the way across and we're budgeting twice the amount. Anyway,
Yep.
we can get into that when we get, I just wondered if there was an explanation for that. So,
Equipment on the licensing is due to the success in recruiting volunteers and getting more people with getting their DZ licensing.
Okay,
That's from the chief right now.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so as they upgrade from their Gs to their DZ to be allowed to drive the fire trucks,
Mhm.
I've been using that line as well for that,
So we pay
for
for
license
license costs.
upgrades. We reimburse them once they're successful.
I don't like the term volunteer. I like auxiliary or something like, like they are important members of our team for sure. Okay, thank you. I think I will take your suggestion, Mr. Barbeau. We are an hour and a half into a meeting, a little bit more than that. So with council's blessing, I would call for a mover and a seconder for a 10-minute recess, please. Wow, never seen hands go up so fast. Councillor St. Louis and Councillor Larrabee.
It was moved by Councillor St. Louis and seconded by Councillor Larrabee. At approximately 7:37, a motion was tabled for a 10-minute recess.
All in favor? Carried, thank you.
So,
Okay.
No, we're not.
No, oh, we're not recording any? No. Thank you. Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're just back off our short recess. Ms. Craddock, you're doing a fantastic job. You're not speaking too quickly yet. It's all going very quickly. We're going to move on to bylaw enforcement services and
Thank you. So again, bylaw is one that when you look at the historical looks a little bit odd. It's not that we haven't had bylaw in that period, it's just that bylaw was actually under corporate services and sort of just part of corporate services. So rather than restating the prior years, just sort of when we pulled bylaw out as a standalone. However, it has had some challenges in the last couple of years. So in 2023, that was the year that this council moved to having one full-time bylaw as opposed to two part-time. And the actuals are just sort of a part year of that full-time bylaw. In 2024, council approved to add a half FTE into that position. And so that was added sort of partway through the year. And so what you're looking at with salaries and wages this year is 1.5 FTEs for the full year. So it's the increase plus the fact that last year we only budgeted a year on the half FTE. Revenues, has largely been set up to drive from municipal ticketing. And again, even though you don't see kind of the history past that, has really been up and down kind of over the years, depending on our stability of the workforce. So again, with having a dedicated bylaw officer and the full-time position, we are seeing that come up. It's not a cost recovery situation with bylaw. And as we roll through getting AMPs in, whether AMP sits here, whether AMP sits in fees, whether we see some change in those numbers as we kind of roll things through. You will see sort of a big increase in education on bylaw enforcement, and not a whole lot of history on education. So there is a provincial body that oversees things, and the training doesn't work the way your other conferences do. They run a couple programs a couple times a year, and it's kind of on a first come first serve. They don't keep waiting lists. They don't put you on the next one. They don't run extra ones. So our folks have tried a couple times to get into this training this year without any success. In addition, they also looking at one of the big things that bylaw deals with is property standards. So in addition to the municipal law enforcement courses and certification, there is actually a property standards officer that we'd like to take both our officers through. So right now we have sort of a combined effort on property standards between our building department and our CBO and bylaw, that they work together. And certainly if they had the whole picture of property standards, they could relieve some of our CBOs as far as the inspection and acting on that kind of stuff. They are the first response already. It's just that our CBO comes out earlier. And again, looking at how busy our building and planning, that the more we can have bylaw do, the easier it is for our CBO. So that's what you see this big increase is both to get the Municipal Law Enforcement of Ontario courses and to get the CBO training not the CBO training. We're not going to make them CBOs, but to get the property standards certification for both officers there. Office supplies, there is, and I'm not sure actually if I put it in the request. I don't know if I put it in the strategic documents here. There is actually a request for new software as to support the ticketing. Now, overall, and I think we did mention it kind of at a prior council meeting. We're looking at the global municipal software, but just they would like the ability to have sort of a portable solution. So we're still manually writing tickets and then manually coming back and entering them into the software. And they're just looking for a portable solution that they can print tickets right on the spot. They can come back and it talks to Eris and it talks to our software, and it kind of reduces some of that clerical. And so that's why there's sort of that significant increase in the office supplies lines. Now, it is one of those things that if we go ahead with a standalone software, that there will be year-over-year cost, not as high as this, but there will be year-over-year cost to maintain a software in there. Vehicle expense, you'll see a decrease in it. And the vehicle expense was sort of a line we had set because we just last year also acquired an actual vehicle. We used to pay mileage to our two, when we had part-time bylaw officers, we used to actually pay mileage. And then we had a vehicle that we inherited from the police and public works and things like that. But last year we actually got a vehicle and we left everything kind of under vehicle expense. You'll see what has been proposed this year is a drop in vehicle expense, but what's being taken off there, you'll see in the transfer to reserve. And so there is a transfer to reserve request in bylaw, and that's so that we can start building for a fleet replacement in bylaw. So again, it's not new money, it's just a transfer from one line to another. And so that's what you do see just at the end of page 43, you see this $5,000 transfer to reserve. And again, that's not new money that they're looking for, it's just the reallocation of vehicle expense money down to transfer to reserve. Vehicle expense covers, insurance, fuel, repairs, and maintenance, and that we actually are putting money each year into reserve for a bylaw vehicle replacement schedule.
Thank you very much. What is services and rents, please?
Oh, so there is a fee that we submit, that we pay to MTO for when we get registered. If we get registered information from the MTO that we're taking to court on tickets.
Okay, thank you.
Which is why you haven't seen it, because we've just sort of got back on the ball for ticketing.
Okay, and you kind of answered the question on the office supplies. So a new software system would have a certain cost for implementation that's associated with it.
Yeah.
And then they are subscription-based services, but that subscription would be less than what the initial onboarding of a solution would be.
Yeah.
Okay. And since we're already looking at some solutions with service requests, I'm going to assume that you're looking at maybe some systems that have multiple components, maybe address.
Yeah, so the fire chief that the bylaw folks answer to, they've looked at something that they like, but I've asked them kind of just to pause on doing anything until we've looked at the entire picture, because the less pieces of software we have, the less pieces of software that has to talk to each other, the easier it makes it across the board, yeah.
Great, thank you. Other questions or comments?
Get into the question train.
Okay.
Question team, through you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if we talk about this later or now. It's not really about the cost specific, but you talked about one-time cost to implement this new software for the bylaw officers. Do we have an idea generally of what ongoing costs might be? Just curious what we're getting into and what it's going to cost.
And again, this is based on a software that they would like, that may change if we look at the entire picture, but perhaps, Chief, we can bring it back. Do you have the number there?
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll bring it back to you.
I'll take a look and see what the annual
Yeah.
cost would be.
Okay. And then just not cost related, but more service related. I'm going to assume that if we do implement the system and it's going to be more efficient for our bylaw officers to write tickets, follow up, all that stuff, that it's going to increase a little bit of their ability to be within.
Time and accuracy as well.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, and just a follow-up question. Would a software solution then be shared, like for this kind of type thing, be shared between fire and bylaw? Like, so does fire issue like tickets and such for, say, like the burning bylaw, or for, I don't know, what else?
So we do invoice for responses.
Okay,
We issue Part 1 tickets through provincial court, provincial offenses for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, those type of items. Bylaw is a separate provincial offense infractions that they're dealing with.
Okay.
The software that they're looking at is not the same software as we're looking at. As Ms. Craddock mentioned, some of the programs that are in the municipal service are what was with the former police, the city police. Some of that software that we still have access to for looking up information, issuing the tickets, the summons, would still go with some of the programs that we have access to under the provincial side through the municipality.
And just one more question, it's probably not budget related, and I would probably scold myself for going off topic, but, so the offenses that you would lay charges for, are any of those, would any of those be able to be transferred over into an AMP system, or are they completely separate? So like smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms can be tied directly to a property.
So that's
So
one that,
can those be taken out of POA and put into an AMP system?
so that's one that we'll have to get clarification from the province because they're a Part 1 issued under the Fire Protection and Preventions Act.
Okay,
Whether they can be transferred over to AMPS, we're not sure, but we are looking at the open air burning regulations, call for service types of invoicing and stuff like that.
I appreciate you answering that, sorry, thank you. Other questions or comments within that section? Okay, we're gonna move on to committees, boards, and service partners.
So we're going to start with the two little ones. So we still maintain small budgets in emergency measures and heritage committee. Just for the historians, the emergency measures budget used to have amounts that we were transferring into reserves for looking at updating our facilities or generators or things like that, that helped our emergency response. It has just a little bit of budget that remains for training and materials and supplies related to our facilities and our generators and things like that. Or if we had to do training on the emergency management or had new folks coming in. Heritage Committee also set up quite a number of years ago to look at capturing pieces of the community and recognizing pieces of the community. So those are what those two small budgets are. If we look at boards, so the Police Service Board has had, again, it looks the same to us. It has had a lot of transition this year as the provincial legislation rolled out how OPP boards now behaved and what municipal OPP boards were and things like that. So there was a period of time where the board was unable to meet because of provincial legislation requirements. So their current year as far as honorariums and stuff is a little bit behind where you would expect it to be. And that impacted a lot of their activities this year. But we've got through all that kind of transition. Like I said, we were actually fortunate as we came through, and we requested that when the province was looking at consolidation and all the rest, that we were a large enough partner in the detachment here to maintain our own boards. We didn't amalgamate with other communities, so our board is still just our board as it was before, and we don't have any that headache that goes along with the amalgamated boards. A little bit of increase just to offset the fact that membership fees are increasing for the members of the board as well. The library board, they have actually passed their budget, and this was their submission of 454,000, so an increase from last year. I did have the clerk put a letter from the CEO of the board to council, sort of talking about some of the things that they've got going on that impacted their budget. They talked specifically about some of the things that they have a reserve separate from our reserves. And so talked a little bit about things that they plan to use the reserve for. I will point out that on their line, kind of almost down at the bottom, where it speaks about the library reserve is also used as a float for expenses while waiting for government funding to arrive is absolutely incorrect. That's not what the use of reserve is. So we just talked about reserves. Don't take this as what reserves are. Don't go down that road. That's absolutely incorrect. What the CEO means is they've got money in their bank to float until the government funding comes in. She didn't actually mean that they're using their reserve, because that's not how you use reserves. And so that's just sort of a little bit of their discussion on what's going on in their year. Now, as it speaks down below, when we're talking about the boards, council can go back and say, this is not the level that we want to fund you at. And what can you do? Council can't go back and say, buy less books. So it's that little bit of how the control sits with boards. Cemetery board, you'll see in the notes that there's a request for an additional $10,000 transfer to reserve. Now, the cemetery board itself maintains again a reserve for itself that it's Initially, like long years ago, again, back in the historians, council funded reserve amounts until the cemetery board could start purchasing columbariums. And then as we now sell niches in the columbariums, they put money back into the reserve. And so there's this transfer that goes back into reserve each year, depending on how many niches have been sold from the columbariums. So they are currently looking at doing a columbarium in field. Cache Bay? Yeah, I Cache Bay to you earlier, yeah, it's in Cache Bay. My apologies, it says field in here, it's Cache Bay. But there is kind of sufficient demand to look at one in Living as well. However, they don't have sufficient funds in their reserve right now to do both. And so have requested this additional amount so they could do two columbariums installed in 2025. Now, that is actually because they do kind of retrieve the money from it. You know, it is money that can be paid back into general reserve if it comes from, or can be retained within their reserve. So that, again, they've got future expansion possibilities. But that's why there's that $10,000 increase requested this year to be able to do the two columbariums. Municipalities kind of inherit cemeteries. When other folks abandon cemeteries, we don't have any choice but to assume cemeteries. And, you know, land is a finite thing. And so as we run out of space, and actually as you know, the world changes, there's less demand for full casket burials. We also have less room for full casket burials. So columbariums are a solution that means we can continue to have some of these cemeteries alive. You know, that's a bad thing.
That is such a bad. Cemetery is alive. Okay.
But at least cemeteries can continue to operate. You know,
Okay, I'll just interrupt you. Does anybody need know what a columbarium is? Because unless I had run into the guy who sold one at a conference somewhere, I wouldn't know. Everybody knows what a columbarium. Okay, I never knew.
Little apartments.
Yeah, little apartments. Couple of questions in regards to cemetery. Where does the cemetery revenues show? Because there are revenues that come from the cemeteries, like opening and closing. So is that under?
No, so the net, we show a net amount for the boards.
Okay,
So their revenue and their expenses are rolled up together in that. So then when you look at the historical, again, the historical is the net. And so, you know, they have sometimes had very good years in sales, you know? We'll think of it as people pre-planning, not, you know, the other, but yeah.
Trying to get in there.
Exactly, yeah. And so it is a net that you see in the board line.
so when you're looking at the cost of a columbarium, the number of apartments, offsets, like we do the math to charge back at cost recovery at least.
Yeah, so we take a look, and it's one of those things that the board looks at the fees and charges each time. And now, again, the recovery that we have is based on columbariums that we installed quite a number of years ago. And so as we roll through, if they go ahead with purchasing new columbariums, we will have to take a look at what the cost recovery is on columbariums still. Yeah.
When those fees are dictated by a policy or bylaw that would come to council to increase fees, if we need to do that in order to make cost recovery work on that. Okay. I kind of had a question about the library, as I do, but sorry, it came from this. I only just saw this for the first time. We can come back. We can come back to pieces. So if I
Absolutely.
this and I have specific questions on the library funding. Councillor Gagne?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So what happens if the money isn't all spent from these boards? Where does it go?
It just goes, so it is just sort of returned as part of the general surplus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
With the exception of the library.
Library goes into their reserve.
Yeah.
Their reserve.
Yeah.
But the other boards, they just go back to the
Yes.
municipal.
Yep.
surplus?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So we'll walk you through the policing budget. So our policing budget includes not just our OPP costs, but it also includes our facility costs and revenues that are connected with it and things like that. So there's a couple things I'll point out, both in the historical and in the current. So in the 2024, you'll see some projections that in the grant line and also in the contractor line that look a little odd. And so that's actually, we have a community safe policing grant that the OPP is partnered with Westminster General Hospital and has this crisis response team, and the grant offsets the wages from the member that comes from Westminster General Hospital. It wasn't all accrued at the end of 2023 because there was a lot of confusion and we didn't have solid numbers at the end of 2023. So in 2024, you see both the current year crisis response plus a good chunk of the 2023 crisis response, but you also see the revenue connected with it. So you see higher contractor costs, but you also see higher grant costs. When we're looking at 2024 grant, then it's only sort of a part year of the community safety response grant, because it actually only runs until March. The board has applied for funding under a different envelope to continue that. We haven't heard yet. Additional sources of funding that we do receive court security and transportation, and we receive RIDE. So that all sits in sort of the grant funding. The other revenue is sort of the fees and charges that they collect at the OPPs for criminal record checks and those types of services. They did inform us this year that over a 4-year period, they're clawing that back from reimbursing it to the municipalities. It's going to stay in the provincial pool, become part of that overall spread of the provincial costs. So, you know, I put a reduction in there because they've told us there's going to be this clawback. That said, we've usually done fairly well with those fees, but eventually that amount is going to go away. Benefits is just that we actually still have responsibilities to police officers that retired prior to transition that are on benefits because their collective agreement allowed them to remain on benefits till 65. And so that's just our obligation to those that retired prior to transition. So in the contractor line, you do see there is an increase in the 2025. So they've actually just very recently sent us their projected costs. You will have seen stuff in the news probably from some of our neighbors or things about, or if you've been at any conferences lately about costs on OVP, because some of our neighbors and some of the smaller communities saw much more significant increases than we've had. We've actually stayed, as far as our percentage of the provincial overall envelope, we've actually stayed the same. We haven't sort of changed up and down, which means that our weighted calls for service are the same as our weighted calls for service. We've been consistent in our weighted calls for service in relation to how we sit within the provincial envelope. The OPP themselves had a collective agreement settlement that saw some wage increases, which sort of have pushed everything up for everybody. So we do see that increase in our contractor. That contractor cost is not just our OPP, but it also does include a partial year of that crisis response and that payment to Westminster General Hospital. So there's a partial of that built in. The rest is our facility costs, and our facility costs have been reasonable so far. So we don't have any change with that amount there. What has changed, and it's actually in the plus, is that financing costs. So included in the financing costs are actually the financing of the building. And so we have 2 different loans that are attached to that building. One that amortizes over 30 years for our portion, and one that amortizes over 20 years for the portion that the province is leasing from us. And so we had a 20-year lease, so it has a faster amortization. So we've got just the loan part that's in that financing cost. We also had 2 other pieces that were in the financing cost. One, we're at almost the last year of financing the exit costs. So, those transition costs for the HR, so the pension updates or top-ups and that kind of stuff, we're almost at the end of that. But we also had initially in the transition borrowed from general reserve, and we didn't need to borrow as much as we thought we were going to, so we've been able to pay it back faster. So we are now paid back the transition costs that we got into to general reserve. So that's what that 202 that you see coming out of the financing costs is, that there's no longer a need to pay back the general reserve. And so the overall change to the policing budget is just a $294,000 change. So a little bit of extra stuff that goes on with our budget compared to, again, some of our neighbors that may just have a contract and that's all.
Questions or comments about that? I'll just say, just for the math people out there, the increase in costs on the contractors is at 12.25%, just as a note on that. But there have been reports across the province about the municipalities facing up to 20% increases on their policing costs. Yeah, you know, we're probably midway there, but it is a significant raise.
On page 47, the lease. Is that lease long term or?
Yeah. So it is
Was it a fixed price or, because I see that it went up a little bit, but then it doesn't go up from this year to next year and everything else is going up.
It's both. So it's a 10 plus 5 plus 5, so a 20-year lease. Part of it is a base cost, and that part is fixed. And so the base cost actually recovers the portion of the construction that was related to the provincial part. So 48% of our construction, and that part is fixed. What varies, but it varies kind of at year end, is the operating. And so at the end of each year, if our operating costs are higher, then we actually get that made up from them. So I've budgeted the same because we don't have sort of a year-end position on that. But yeah, if our operating costs are higher because it just costs us more to operate the building, then you know their portion switches, so that we will have these reconciliations at the end of each year to see what the operating part is. So it does both. It's both fixed and variable depending on what our costs are.
So it could be higher.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I think it should be a little higher because in keeping with everything else, you do put stuff in the reserve because eventually that building is going to need some work. So we should be building a little reserve.
So with how it was structured, at this first stage, when we're recovering the capital portion, so when we're recovering the construction costs, it's sort of like a cost recovery. Past the point where we've recovered the construction costs, then that fixed portion changes and it's going to become a base rate, and then it is absolutely, to offset what the future needs of the building are going to be. Yeah, absolutely.
This hasn't started because the building is so new.
Yeah,
Right.
but absolutely right. Absolutely right. Eventually, it's going to need stuff. Yep.
I just have a question to follow up on that. So the operating cost portion, so this is where you say you're conservative on revenues and
Yeah.
So that obviously could change, but is the way the lease is written on that building, so operating costs would be your utilities and basic maintenance of the building, cleaning, like.
Yes.
So let's say it did
Sounds
need some kind of repair that was a little more than, like, not maybe a capital investment, but like a $20,000 this or whatever. Would that be recovered through the lease as well, or 48% of that recovered through the lease?
Yes. Yeah. So if we had to put in, there have been damage and we put in new doors, or there was stuff down in the cell compound or things like that we were doing repairs on. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Resto.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just, I think I know the answer, but just for clarity, so increase this year is just under 500,000 for the cost of policing. Fixed, unlike DSAB or health unit, we have a voice and we can, debate that or have discussion to have a lowered amount. That's not possible with this, right?
This is
We just get the bill and we pay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're looking at about a 2.3% tax increase just for policing increases this year.
So in this year, we're winning a little bit because of the no longer needing to repay the reserve. If we didn't have that, then yes, you would be correct. Say we win a little bit this year just because of that circumstances, but otherwise, yes, you're correct.
We have fared better in previous years, Councillor Estill, so
But it
this
is
is a bit of a catch-up.
It seems like a,
So the way the collective agreements work with the police is they tend to be the last ones and then they go the highest ones. So there's always these kind of jumps that the OPP have. This is a challenge.
and we know or don't know or this, because I don't follow this very much, but historically, is this something we may have to swallow again next year? Or we have no idea what's going on?
Not typically, no.
And I know this
So
is- this-
it really is base rate. So our calls for service, as Craddock said, is consistent. So it really is base rate. So the major part of any policing service, I think, is around 90% HR. So typically these happens and then there's catch up retro and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't expect it. Having said that, if you're looking at it as a total program, I think that we're about the same as we were when we did the costing. That's the savings. So, we were at 4.5 million back in 2018 or 2017, and we're at 4.6 now. But yeah, and I think we gain again with the building, and that's a buffer.
Yeah, and just, I'm not debating anything here, just going through, 6 months ago, we had some discussions. And if I'm not mistaken, I thought that around the table here it was shared that locally OPP weren't necessarily open to taking on additional requests from the community, that they were doing what they were doing. And I'm not debating that they're not doing a great job, but specific requests that we were looking at, there was some, I don't know what, resistance or pushback or
For
discussion.
law enforcement. They wouldn't take on additional by law enforcement service. I haven't heard anything, and perhaps the chair can speak to, but if you're looking at proactive and targeted enforcement, I think they're open to receiving from the community and from their board areas of concern, such as last week we talked about the landfill sites, and perhaps we can direct them to be, near our landfill sites between midnight and 4 and Field as an example. And they tend to respond to that and deploy that way. But in terms of additional service, that's provincially mandated.
And one last question, if I may. So you mentioned earlier, and I'm just trying to understand this stuff, calls for service stayed consistent, that's tied to the actual cost. So if we have increases in our requests for targeted enforcement or that type of stuff, we could expect that would increase our costs because we're utilizing the service more.
Well, that's proactive. Calls for service are calls that go in there. But in terms of their general, usually go deploy in cash pay, that's just proactive policing.
So it's not-
From my understanding when I was studying all of this a long time ago, Pembroke is that's not an additional cost.
Thanks.
So if a neighbor would call in to say they saw a strange vehicle at the Field landfill and they went, that is a call for service.
That's a call for
If
service.
at the board level, just as a reminder, it's Councillor St. Louis, Councillor Gagner, who are the council representatives on that board. If during the board discussions, they're identifying issues, speed areas, whatever, then that is not calls for service. Just because I think council may be, this obviously makes up a large part of our municipal budget, as it does. There was information provided by the OPP to staff and to myself on the billing structure for this year, and I think that had some information on the historical calls for service over the last couple of years, and it might just be helpful. So if I could ask that information just be forwarded to council for their
Sure.
information and education on how that how we are informed of the cost increases, and again, it does have some data there. And I think there has also been discussion at the OPP board level. And I think Councillor Gagner and I have had a discussion about public education, that every call does cost, and so that residents are using the OPP service efficiently. not calling in things that maybe should be bylaw or calls do increase our costs as a municipality. Other questions or comments on the policing budget? Councillor Rivard?
Thank you through, after Councillor Russell was speaking, made me think of something. I think I already know the answer, but so when I hear on the radio that West Nipson OPP go out to Killarney to help with something, that doesn't come back to us, right?
No. So it's 5248, and that part of the 48 is Killarney and all of the others. And the other thing that's interesting too is you find all the crimes in West Nipissing. It's the detachment's called Nipissing West, so it's not all us. It's actually they actually go around Sudbury as well. Sudbury detachment is part of Nipissing West, so the detachment commander is based here. So their detachment is based here. That's why it's called that. So yeah.
So we also serve Marks Bay Warren, French River partially, although they do have their own a small detachment, but it is Sudbury East.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sorry, Councillor Larrabee.
Thank you. Would it be probably an idea to invite the, because like I know I've been through it quite a bit during my tenure here, but maybe the OPP could give a session here to council on exactly what all the questions that were asked.
Sure, it'd have to be in the new year because we're in transition with the detachment commander. The present detachment commander is retiring like
Next week.
Now.
so we'll let them do that transition, and through Dan or through Councillor Gagne, we can.
Have a
That
delegation.
would be helpful information.
Okay. And next on to service partners. No more questions on policing? Thank you.
So all of this part is actually assumptions, with the exception of animal control. So animal control is per the contract that we have with the Humane Society. So that is what our 2025 amount is for the animal control. I will just run you through sort of the assumptions used in the other boards. For those of you that are sitting on boards, can Councillor Restoule, this is mostly you because you get the fun of sitting on all the fun boards. So in the health unit, I've used a 4% assumption over actual years. So when I look back at the history, we have been sort of between 3 and 5 in the last sort of 7 years or so. So, that's why I've used the 4% assumption on the public health. DSAM's a little bit different in that what DSAB settles as their overall change in municipal levy is not what we see, because it is based on assessment growth. And so we tend to be growing at a faster assessment level than North Bay itself. And so it does sort of skew sort of how so DSAB might approve a 3%, West Nipissing might see a 4% increase. So the number I've used for DSAB is a 4.25% increase in the budget there. Chateau is a little bit different as well. So we had a transfer to reserve in 2024 of $391,000. I've kept that same number for transfer to reserve. We also pay a $10,000 fee to the Chateau as a sort of a share of cost in the bus that they run for shuttling seniors around. And then in the levy portion, they do their levy a little bit different in that they have they calculate their levy, and then they also have potentially a return of surplus. Now, some of the other boards do this as well, but they kind of collapse it together. The Chateau keeps it separate. So I've used sort of a 6% increase in what the levy has been and assumed no return in surplus. So sorry, I take that back. I did the other way. So I've assumed a 6% increase because I've assumed how the surplus, the return of surplus may go away. So again, it could be that the Au Chateau board itself may only pass a levy or an increase that's smaller across the municipality, but what they do with the return of surplus impacts what our actual end result is, what it nets out to ourselves. So I've done a sort of a 6% over what our actual, what we actually paid to Au Chateau in 2024. And then, so that's where we've come. So obviously kind of a lot of variability. And again, our number from the Chateau has varied greatly over the last few years. Again, because of how they've changed that return of surplus, what it's actually impacted our taxpayers has been as high as 16% and as low as 5%. So it's certainly kind of an all over one. So that's what we've used, the sort of 6% increase on the Chateau there.
And, just to note for council, outside of the animal control, these are all just projections based on historical until we actually get the assessments bill from the other three organizations. We really don't know, so we're basing, and we don't have control over those anymore. Pay we need to pay, and there's not generally any negotiation on those items. Wow, that's the rest of them.
Through you, Madam Mayor. There's a little bit of wiggle room in some of those boards. We can, municipal representatives can send it back to similar to what we do here. There's not a lot of room, but sometimes there's a little. We've had a little bit of increases in the past, but just to update staff, we have DSAB, we're meeting on Wednesday in the afternoon. That's our first look at budget numbers. So I'll keep you guys updated, keep everyone updated on what's happening there. And the health unit is meeting on December 4th for their budget. So we'll have, I can look, I have a document, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but we got our budget package. So I can let you know where it's looking right now. But just to update those dates to everyone.
Budgets in the fall, I appreciated that last year. That Councillor Resto gets us some information quickly so we can adjust things, so that's good.
Great, Councillor Rivard.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like more information. In 2021 for the Au Chateau, it was 800,000. What would be the reason for 30-40% increase over 4 years?
So, and some of the increase does. Sorry, you said the Chateau? Yeah. So absolutely, we've seen these large increases starting in sort of 2020. Now, 2020 though was COVID, and so when you talk about costs going along with COVID, then the Chateau certainly had costs. Now they did get some government funding to help offset those costs, but cleaning and staffing, they certainly had challenges during COVID, and the Chateau gets funding from a variety of sources, including the municipal contribution. They are an HR heavy organization, so as collective agreement increases or as the province changes mandates as far as matching service levels for hours and things like that, there's certainly going to be a lot of there. But yeah, they've certainly had a significant growth. I think they probably had some clawback in provincial funding separate from the COVID. I think they probably had some clawback in provincial funding over the same period. We saw that with DSAB and the health unit as well. This change in what's available for the province, or at least a freeze in provincial funding as costs increase, but the funding is frozen. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, our animal control contract, aren't we supposed to get a quarterly report on what actually the work they're doing in our area?
Might be the annual report, but you might be right, Councillor.
We have an update on,
We haven't gotten that, so that's a good reminder. Thanks. We'll go and have a look at the contract.
It's worth the money.
Yeah.
Look at other options. And maybe not, maybe they're being utilized more than we think, so. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Councillor Rivard.
Thank you. It's not with the levies and contracts, more with the boards. It was similar to what Councillor Gagne mentioned, like a library. Do we receive an annual report where we get to see all the activities, programs they provide? website would be the best option for something like that.
There's nothing mandated, but we can certainly request it.
I always enjoy getting their budgets too.
I do have their full budget. They did send that as part of the package. It was approved by their board. So, but yeah, I don't have sort of that breakdown of that other than what she's provided in this notes here. But yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Peller.
Maybe we have it, I just maybe missed it, but do we have a pie chart to show the
I think that,
do we have a pie chart for the revenue? Do we have a pie chart for the different,
It's at the beginning of your package. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
other questions, comments? Now, did you want to go over that last page today, or do you want to do that when we get through capital and we have the reserve information?
I will just show you the two, it's both the last page, and then I'm going to skip back up to the stuff at the page at the beginning. The last page is just the projected debt position at the end of the year. So the 2010 water and sewer loan actually pays out in 2025. And I'm going to cheer a little bit, yeah. The rest all have dates longer than that, but that's just sort of where we're sitting at the end of the year. We can talk later about what our debt threshold is, because the provincial government sets that for us each year. So we can talk what our debt threshold is. We're talking about that in capital and what you want to do. There are restrictions, but we are certainly in a very healthy debt as far as that. And then I'm going to flip you back to the beginning on page 23. Actually, I'll do page 22 first. Mr. Barbaro, I think, sort of touched on this. This is the projected general reserve position. So what it has here is not showing any of the, the potential $1 million surplus from 2024 going in there. So this is just where we are without any of the 2024 surplus. So we've got a projected surplus of $1,068,000. So that can get added into here if that's where we end up. So you're going to sort of be at the 4.89 million sort of potential at the end of 2020, end of 2024. And then the next page is the uncontrollable. And so, I apologize for the very small fuel thing. It's just a formula that comes across. I wouldn't otherwise have usually included something like that. But you can see that most of what we've got sort of with the uncontrollable there is related to our boards and things like that, which are all estimates. The wage line that is just our existing complement without the new personnel in public works, without the additional hours in community services is actually that 600,000. And then we offset this year by the fact that we got this windfall in the OMPF, so that our uncontrollable expenses might be the 1.27 million, but we do have this additional OMPF. So we're actually not in a bad spot this year as the uncontrollable as we sometimes see. And like I said, a lot of it sits in those assumptions regarding where our boards and levies fall.
So just on page 22 on the general reserve, the ending balance of 3,821 does not include a potential 900,000 draw. So if we were to draw the 900,000 from general reserve as is suggested in the budget, that would then be just below $3 million.
What it also doesn't have though is the actual 2024 surplus. So we would put $1 million in potentially at the end of 2024, and then potentially take 900,000 out in 2025.
And that $1 million surplus is just on operating, because the capital surpluses go back into the dedicated reserves for each departments.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any? Oh,
Sorry.
Councilor Rivera.
I think this would be more like a strategic discussion. I just wanted to know, like, the projected debt page, the last page.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I myself personally, any interest, I despise any interest, right? So would there ever be any suggestions for future discussions, like instead of doing one thing, you pay off one of those that's got $106,000 left. Go 2 years with $5,000 interest, you know, and like I know that's something probably more at the start of the term. It always made me wonder, like, if you are allowed to do higher payments on it, on principal, lower interest, or if there's any strategic advice there.
So a lot of our loans that are there are ones that and again, you know, are actually, because they're all older loans, are actually at really reasonable interest rates. So, you know, the first one, the Infrastructure Ontario, the police fire that finishes actually in 2026, has a 2.1% interest rate. You know, so we have some really good interest rates here. And then some of the structural ones, so the ones that are Infrastructure Ontario and the ones that are the water and sewer ones are actually ones that we're locked into because of how the structure of the loan is, that the Infrastructure Ontario ones is through a pool that they have. It's one of the advantages of doing Infrastructure Ontario loans is that you actually get a fixed rate for longer term. So you don't have to do this renewal and have the risk associated with it. So breaking out of them though, has more cost attached to it. And the water and sewer ones are what they call these swap loans. And so they actually sort of trade on derivatives. And I won't try to explain it all tonight because it's really technical. It is really technical, but it's the same thing. We're sort of a pool of investment there. And so breaking out of them becomes expensive. We have looked at the breaking out of the water and sewer ones at times when interest rates were lower. But again, you know, those interest rates are, you know, 3.89% and things like that. They're not terrible. So we haven't had that discussion. Certainly if there are ones we want to look at, but we are starting to get close to when some of these other ones actually pay out. So, you know, we're not necessarily winning a lot by paying out now on some of these ones, yeah.
You know, your question's a good one, and it's really good to hear that you don't like it on a personal level. That's great. On a finance level for the municipality, it's kind of a, you know, so it depends on what you bought for it too, and what kind of money you saved in terms of infrastructure and all of that stuff. So that 3% hit on interest, the benefit you would have gotten to the amount of road repairs or this or that or the other thing. So it really is a strategic decision. You're in a good place debt-wise, you know, and certainly what Elise was talking about the government mandated debt threshold, I would never go there. That is way too high. That's like crazy. But the use of debt, depending if the interest rates are right in that, and you have a legacy project you really want to get off the ground, is one way of doing it. But you have to be judicious in how you're doing it. So we're getting close now to maybe recommend debt, but not necessarily this year.
Okay, thank you, because I saw a few were getting close to the end. So. Thanks.
Great question. Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Larrabee?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see here with the general reserve, like you said, you got 4 million and you've got a potential of 1 million that was put aside last year. So you're almost at 6 million minus maybe 900,000. But
I think you got enough.
I got to compliment the staff and this council here to bring this reserve back to where it should be. Because we had depleted the reserve quite a bit.
I think, so you have 3.8 now, when you're looking at that. And then you have the potential, or you have potential for conservatively $1 million. So you're at 4.8. Then if you decide to dip into reserve to stabilize the tax fund, which we are recommending obviously, but on a declining basis to get into not having to, you're probably going to end up at around the $4 million mark at the end of the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My compliments.
Thanks. So, do you want me to, is there any other?
Councillor Glenn?
I've got just one more question. I haven't seen any item for cybersecurity. I'm just wondering if we're looking at potentially securing ourselves. More and more municipalities are getting hit by cybersecurity. So I'm just wondering what's our status in this. I think maybe it's something that we're not looking at it like seriously, that maybe we should look at.
That's a good point. I do saw, and I don't remember it, but I just saw a report and an email from our IT person. We can bring that information back and look at it.
There is a little bit in the capital this year
For
that tied to it, but it is certainly something that, again, is part of that. When I said there's IT stuff coming, it's because we're moving
It's that.
towards some of that, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
and protecting sewer and water IT as
Yes,
well. You know, it's not
absolutely.
just
Yeah.
our operations.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, I will give the floor to you, Mr. Barlow, to close us off for the evening.
well, you know, we thought we were early, but we're not.
No, we're not.
Good question. So you've got an overview of the overall expenditure explanations. Obviously, you don't have the discussion that's a lot of fun with council of how you're going to spend money with. And so you've got your capital report that's being provided to you now. There's also some other special project reports. There's also some projects that were brought forward in the last month by council, and staff is prepared, have costed that, whether it's in the report or whether they speak to it. So the next step is, I think, the more fun step for yourselves is that tomorrow we'll be looking at taking this information and where do you want to go. So we will be presenting the capital as well, and then making a determination as to what expenditure level you want to take it to. And so I'm not suggesting that we can finish on time tomorrow, but certainly not tooting my own horn. It's and the folks really laid out the information in a nice, consistent, constant way, and then we can have a look at your comfort level with expenditure levels. I will indicate, as I indicate, sales pitch, but I don't get a commission on this. We are continuously going to be challenged with our own source revenues, be it from user fees. You heard that from the KPMG report. And, we can show you where we line up relative to other municipalities as well. And, the issue is affordability of our residents, absolutely. But the other part of it is we are mandated to provide the same services as everybody else. So what I was talking to the mayor about to Councillor Gagne on break is that, the managers and the directors work together and develop an initial budget. Then they pass it to the treasurer, and they work at that level, and then the treasurer and I work at a level, and I get to see it at that part. And I would have some suggestions to get to an acceptable tax rate. And again, but I've done this enough times that I think it's my role to recommend to council where you should go given what you want to do strategically and not necessarily affect the operations. And so, and I can and that's where I become unpopular with the directors as well. But that's the discussions we can have at the end of tomorrow or Saturday. So I guess the homework, Madam Mayor, is you've got the information now. Take a lot of notes, get ready to debate and ask questions, and we'll put our helmets on and be ready to receive you. So.
Okay, so just in closing, again, I'd like to thank all the staff from the directors, managers, everybody who's contributed to the budget process. I know that it's a long process on your end. We come in at the very end and try to, throw throwing stars at you and make you dodge and weave a little bit, but we know that there's been a lot of work going into what we've brought today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here tomorrow and Saturday and next Monday. I know it's a lot of time. Same with council. It's that time of year where we invest a lot of time. There's really spending a lot of time together over the next week, and I do appreciate your work and your brains, bringing your brains to the table. So thank you.
Councillor Larrabee and seconded by Councillor Restool. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2024-87, being a bylaw of the municipality of West Nipissing, confirmed the proceedings at its council budget meeting held on November the 25th, 2024, will come into force and take effect on the date it's passed.
Okay, all in favor? Carried.
It is moved by Councillor Rethul and seconded by Councillor Larrabee. It is resolved that the meeting of council held on November 25th, 2024 be adjourned.
All in favor? Carried. See you all tomorrow night.